commonplace is the large group of local government areas called CRISTESCU, which for our Romanian colleagues we should explain, instead of going into the Pacific Ocean east, which not many people can do or live without drowning, Australians living near Sydney tend to go west because there really isn't any other direction to go except perhaps north and south along the coast. The Western Sydney stretches right out to the Blue Mountains and embraces northern and southern suburbs along its way. And when we had first met Luke CARMAN in 2010, it was, like so many new writers, he was publishing small individual works, performing at the light to great acclaim. I remember people saying, "Oh, Luke CARMAN's come." So he was very popular doing that, and at the same time undertaking university studies. During this period of incubation, if you like, he won the Writers Group Western Sydney competitions in the West, among many other more important achievements. However, we were extremely happy when his winning Zine West work called My Time found its way into his debut title with German Publishing, a first-class literary publishing house of Australia, which also publishes international writers. It was the award-winning An Elegant Young Man, and everybody thought about the title, read the book, thought about the title again. Somebody shares the joke. The Elegant Young Man was one of the first in the way of contemporary semi-autobiographical by people from Western Sydney, writing stories that are actually set in Western Sydney. And for those Romanians who wouldn't understand this, there was this thing about Western Sydney, I know just a bunch of Westies. We're gradually overcoming that attitude. More specifically, in Luke's case, a lot of his scenes were set in Liverpool, which was a place that saw many growing up experiences. I remember at the time, I witnessed both writers and readers being thrilled about this new frontier, as another Zine West writer recently expressed it. Luke's second title, The End with German Publishing, was Intimate Entities, a collection of personal essays about family, writing life, mental health, and also a shaft of polarising commentary on some literary gatekeepers of this field. Luke has worked at many writing festivals and projects. He teaches creative writing for Sydney University, the home of two powerful engines for Australian literature, to which the Writers Group is indebted in many ways as well. He's published at Giramondo and the Writing and Society Research Centre at Western Sydney University, where he obtained his doctorate. Luke is our writing judge for Zine West. We've stopped saying to Luke, "Would you like to do it again next year?" He just is the judge for Zine West. I wouldn't have forgotten how many times he's done it. Each year he gives a report to the contributors to Zine West that mentions every piece published, and we've had wonderful judges, but only Luke has actually done that role, which is quite a task. He's also run excellent workshops for us. However, there's always this other element in our relationship, which includes encouragement, advice, and precious time, and it's inevitable, and we have a great deal of gratitude to do. Today, he's contributing his time and intellect to comment on the English works of 9,000 miles away, as he has done on the Wallaby track. I had to be reminded by Mihaela in a way that every single one of these Romanian Australian collaborations, well, Mihaela, you have done it from the Pounding Pavement, from Dusk to Dawn.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much. As always, extraordinarily generous. It's easy to keep collaborating with people when they insist on being so over the top with their generosity and praise. It makes it sound like I do a lot, and I don't. I'm just in the room where these things happen. Oh yeah, there's the rest of my head if you're curious about it. I'm going to struggle for a moment here and attempt misdirection. Is my presentation on here? So I think a little help from my friends. Our presentation will appear anon, and and I don't usually, if it fails, it doesn't matter. I don't usually go in for the kind of dog and pony show stuff. I usually just read from a piece of paper. That's the way. Thank you. Thank you very much. The only reason I have included visuals this time around is because the worst possible scenario happened last time I did this. I was up here and I was reading out my report on the anthology, and this has never happened to me before, and it's probably the thing that people fear most when they do a presentation. But I started to hear somebody talking in the audience, and it was really annoying, and it was kind of interrupting what I like to think of as a kind of flow of speech. And then I listened a little bit as I was talking, and I could hear that the person was actually shouting out in a little small tiny voice, boring. I could just hear someone going, boring, 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 boring. And what made it worse was that it was, as I looked, it was someone in the front row who was also filming their criticism of my talk, and it also happened to be my son. And because of his small stature and youth, there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't reason with him. I started asking the people around him, please discipline my child. But he couldn't be stopped. And then later on I asked him, why the hell did you do that? You humiliated me. He said, well, I was filming a documentary, and the fact of the matter is, it was true. What you were saying was boring. So, I don't necessarily think being boring is the worst possible scenario. I think sometimes boring is a good sign. It means you're being challenged with something different. You necessarily like it. But long story short, that's why there are now visuals. Okay, so if you're bored, there's always something to look at. So, thank you, Mihaela. Thank you very much for having me here again. It's always an honour. Thank you to everyone in attendance, and please, please, please forgive me if I become expensive. So, it was difficult to answer. True, the perspective looked rather odd, and the walls of the room no longer seemed to meet in right angles. But these were not really the important facts. The really important facts were the spatial relations had ceased to matter very much. So reads the opening epigraph for the Romanian-Australian collaboration. And this is taken from the pages of Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, a work in which the author elaborates on an experience with the psychedelic hallucinogen mescaline. Huxley found the title, Doors of Perception, in the following lines of William Blake's ecstatic prose poetry compendium, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. The lines are, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all three things through narrow chinks of his cavern. The doors of the mind are deliberately narrowed, Huxley believed, to keep our infirm consciousness from overwhelming ecstasy of information, and the mind at large, our potential knowledge of things as they truly are, appears to us only when that mental filter is wedged open by the levers of the psychedelic. Here's another bleaker quote from The Doors of Perception. Most men and women lead lives at worst so painful, at best so monotonous, poor and limited, that the urge to escape, the longing to transcend themselves if only for a few moments, is and always will be the principal appetite of the soul. This is a quote I read at the beginning of the year in a book called Bliss Brain. It's the work of the scholar Dawson Church, who argues in that book that advances in neurochemistry and ever greater insights into neuroplasticity mean that the transcendental has been emancipated. It's no longer the province of gurus, ascetics, monks, that all of us can enter that transcendental space if we just enter the room in which it's contained. I don't know if there's any truth to that, neither do I know if there's any truth in Huxley's description of the narrow mind for which the soul must inevitably starve. But for now, if we are to look elsewhere than scientific progress or psychedelics for the shocks and changes we need to keep us sane, I'm afraid they must continue to come from art, which outside of dreaming is the only out-of-body experience I know about. Art, it's often proposed, takes its meaning or its value from mattering to us in times of trouble. And if these are not troubling times, then they'll do till the trouble gets here. As Natalie Goldberg once put it, we are trying to become sane along with our poems and our stories. Co-editor for this anthology, Luke CARMAN, the poem you just heard from, describes the work of poetics and literary art in this collection, 9,000 Miles Away, as gifts, transformative private visions given to us through stories and reflections by thinkers and survivors. Well, the first of these thinkers and survivors is Jason Gray, at least to the English-only reader, who preaches radical kindness on his journey across the late anti-capitalist hellscape, performing psychic somersaults past Africulture carnivals, a lonesome prophet poet, an exalted mongrel mystic tied in knotted worlds and syntactical incantations. Danny Draper takes the role of enchanted preacher too, howling at the heavens with smouldering visions of the full moon behind a screen of bushfire smoke, inhaling lunatic normality, exhaling minimalist images of apocalyptic hours heralded unheeded in midnight chimes. Across the distant river flats and displaced soil, Norm Fairbairn watches a bamboo-thin figure from 9,000 miles away. She tilts toward the earth, trembling hot and chill, becoming a living phantom, gazing homeward out an empty window, the tissue paper immateriality holding onto memories and dreams still caught in golden air. Henry Biffa stands astride those tyrannical spaces between culture and belonging, going back, first in the colours of the branding flag, then clawing over adversity, wearing hidden birthmarks and accented speech, away from familiar concrete pathways, assailed by fairy tales of Abyssinian mountains, coming home at the end to an immaculate unit in which an old mother's memories still reside. Anna-Maria Belgian gives us a man from upper ground, Vlad the educator, who answers the mighty call of excellence in a world of mediocrity, raging against a deep suspicion that old cliches and equality in classrooms serve to produce compliant, culturally illiterate citizens whose short, brutish, malnourished minds may never nurse subversive sentiments against their masters. Ariel Riveros cannot swear how many tongues add up to make a whole in a revolving arithmetic account of Chaucer's fallows and medieval maps. Whilst I was here with you and living on the other side of the world, stretching limbs beneath the sea submerged sailors, reaching into port and plaza, tripping on the crooked cinema of newspaper journals, Rambo-based calculations of the spheres, root language evolving from alliterative origins to sweet eschatological dreams. Sidney Knezovich is oriented north by similar subterranean concerns for roots, an inclination for direction, perpendicular to cattle-making cud while migrations scale the void to catch kinetic movement. The hour and its final moments circle higher toward an envoy ascendancy which takes verse beyond illusions of belonging. Thomas Thorpe is a departure from Lords across a bent antipodes of receding antiquity. Into mountain ranges. God, it's happening again. I left my son at home. Across a bent and
I'm sorry, so the people who are on Zoom, please put on mute yourself.
It's the unseen. I should have known. Back to the ominous tones. Across a bent antipodes of receding antiquity, into mountain ranges with clouds wound round their inclinations, these shining plains are smooth breathing. Why are they doing this?
You can mute them all.
Yes.
Oh, it's my fault. I'm technologically literate. Press on. It'll become a contest. On sunlit scenes of cafe tabletop biography, immense, magisterial in scale. It's okay. I mean, how much would they have possibly to say Loredana Tudor Tomescu is an overdose of the heart outside its home. A patient waiting in schedules and policies and liminal procedures, attending to a Spanish city.
We need to put them on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I...
Pentru cei care urmăresc din România, vă rog frumos să puneți pe mute, fiindcă altfel toată lumea este întreruptă aici. Mulțumesc!
Yeah. Yeah, missing Romanian. Yeah.
I mean, I feel bad about doing it. It's also a powerful feeling to be able to make people on the other side of the world be quiet. Suffice to say, beating in the hands of a little boy, this reminiscence is lifted to the ear, a shell filled with dreams and heavy weather. Natalia Figueroa Barossa tells the tale of a builder's mark, sets the haunting indentation on an empty bed, the weight left by a grandmother residing in the home whose care has gone to daughters and granddaughters, wrapped in the memory of a living spirit's photograph, tears and conversations with the dead, part ghost, part prayer, in an overwhelming ache of absence. Leonard Bataille, writing from the city of linden trees, is under anchor in a time when crossed legs at kindergarten gave each nostril a weapon of mass destruction, speaking memory and reveling in a chameleon's tense, allowing a single lit match to reach out a box and climb up pipes, then hiding in the Danube by the bushes, breathing through an intergenerational willow reed, where the water stinks of vinegar and death. Peter Cartwright, poet laureate of Parramatta, is where he's always been, at a distance, summoning premonitions up from the past, the stirring nativity, entanglements, and quantum signifiers. The Father and the Son become spiritus and macamundi. Each ascends part and whole, separated by chasms between us and the comedy divine. Alex Pleskin spawns a stupid alphabet from the dirt and fire and feasting after sex, has landed through the smog of copulation into a state of post-Promethean subjugation, waits patiently for the acoustic sacrament to be rung as a parade of Nimrods tumble down the stony Babel towers, emitting empathy, sounds into endless air. Ilona Kruger speaks a more than missing truth, unpicks mimetic idiom, solves puzzles to an accordion discourse, makes lyric at people with innocent magic, defies the fancy of deprivation with imagination, and yet all this self-reliance cannot answer for belonging, that state of being passing by the inner eye like a phantasm from a fairy tale. Kate Bunley begins her pilgrimage in the centre, out there, where one can unlearn isolation and converse with compass points on nomadic winds, voices, a calming nothingness, and a woman on a plane holding Schrodinger's lessons in her lap, wrapped in awakening. Jeff Page writes from a different type of centre, seeing people with a sixth sense for familiar echoes that leave you less yourself, disarms the shock of doppelganger encounters with tiny tercet lines, and makes reuse of mastered art like Auden, the shining legs of Icarus still kicking in tricky air. Daniela Vieira is in retrospection, makes the case for literature, gives its golden forms and grants to those impressions and digressions which makes memory into journey, the perfumed pages granting succor to a blooming voice lifting toward that final carriage of azure air. Bronwyn Lovell is running into your ex, forswears all but coincidence, refuses careful computation of star-crossed, forbids the dissemination of mutual diction, divine remix of metaphor, and urges all not to look back again. Assumption Pritchard has Rhapsody revisited in an ecstatic frisson of high notes bearing memories, in inheritance of musical sympathy, which only these analogies may offer recollection. Name Ibrahim brings her protagonist Bilqis to the failed job interview, just as civil war erupts in gunfire and screams in the smoking streets, overshadowing the awful ordinariness of principals in ill-fitting suits, armed with hostile insults and insinuations. Gabriela Teodora Drux writes of unfears from the village of Luca, asks what water and fire think of dying, wonders how much stone and flesh share despite antipathy. It compares the Princess of Athens to a flower and follows to the end in careful quatrains where Orpheus appears, looming at angles like a bent rib. Alison Miller climbs on mountains in the morning's light, saturated in sweat, to the sound of the city's bells are too far below. Lines of schoolgirls pass like fog through visions from antiquity, where intoxicated expats born beyond here dragons. Dominique Heck emerges from an envelopment of bush to announce fire relies on the leaves of gum trees, hissing up the hallucinatory inferno for which no word is adequate. A gorging column of erasure leaving alliteration charred as roots, smoking flesh, white hot and incandescent as an empty page. Cien Furnace writes a letter to him in the small short hours, holding on to hard edges across a bridge between inspection and detention, with a clump and drum of steel doors ring around a promise made through perspex glass, to a tall boy with deep eyes and proud dark skin where scares and scars keep suffering's account. Alan Lake is going home to say goodbye, from Tasman to Saskatchewan, with a week waves under wild Asquith skies, and an old man down stiff whiskey between a roll call of cousins, living and deceased, two temporary states which we may know again. Trisha Dearborn is a starfinder, spinning careful contemplations of the stars in cardboard certitude for deep and dark skies, shines pinpricks imbued with gold against the cosmic expanse. Backyard torchlight shining on a loneliness whose crossing is light years wide. Julian Marder presents the calling of the roots, whose narrator is no scientist nor was meant to be, is a philosopher of origins, dismisses John Lennon's line in the stuff of superstars and fears the pragmatism of American atoms, discovers a subatomic inclination toward the calling east. C.A. Broadrib must change and rearrange according to the shoulder parrot, so turns pool toys into ghouls, summons intrepid reporters, makes cakes out of men, and then out of that sweet clay performs miracles of aviation, flies free from times of trouble. Mihaela CRISTESCU has cut the earth in two with a letter to a fisherman. Insists that there is only one afternoon in which the heavens and winds can meet the fabled city. Settling on a solitary ride around the glasses, shuts eyes and close against the laughing shore until drums wake dreams of ships on endless blue expanse, commandeering tight topsail lines of verse toward finally involved beat. Okay, so having been gifted with these storied visions by so many thinkers and survivors, punctuated along the way by Luminata Săvănescu's tender illustrations, I am drawn to conclude with these melancholy but vivid lines from Evelyn Waugh's Bride's Head Revisited. Perhaps all our loves are merely hints and symbols, vagabond language scrawled on gateposts and paving stones along the weary road that others have trampled before us. Perhaps you and I are types, and this sadness which sometimes falls between us springs from disappointment in our search, each straining though and beyond the other, snatching a glimpse now and then of the shadow which turns the corner, always a pace or two ahead of us. That seemed to be a pretty good way to summarise what I experienced. It is extremely rare and interesting and amazing as always, collection. Thank you very much for your time.